Conservatives are saying about their own leader.
He's cooked. We're just waiting for committee to start.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Shefford. Well, my colleague talked about all kinds of topics, left and right, some related to public safety and security. Here's my question, though, about increasing crime against women. My questions this morning are mostly about that, because that's what we're studying at the at the Status of Women Committee. We're studying violence against women. Now, the Bloc Québécois proposed through Bill C5 that the bill be split in two so that we could take more time to study as much as needed. Especially, we wanted more time to study violent crime against women. But why does his government not work with us on something that affects violence against women? Why did his government refuse to split the bill in two so that we could study things properly and duly? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Whether it was the issue of banning assault-style firearms to other gun control measures, beefing up supports in many different areas to support women in all areas of the country, that's something in which we have been doing and will continue to do going forward. I think that you will find there's a great deal of compassion and interest on the issues that the member has raised, and a minister that is very much open to having that dialogue. And if there's ideas in which we can do to actually improve the legislation, obviously we would be very much interested in doing that. Over the last 9 years as a government, both in a majority and minority situation, the government is clearly demonstrating its willingness to accept good amendments to legislation that will improve the legislation in itself.
We have time for a brief question. The Honourable for Timmins James Bay.
I want to thank my colleague. I agree with him. We were wasting a lot of time in the House, but I asked him a question the other day about the international war crimes in Gaza and what this government's going to do. This morning, the ICC indicted Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant for war crimes against humanity. Canada played a huge role in Rwanda with Romeo Dallaire and the war crimes there. In Srebrenica, in Serbia, Canada played a huge role, but we're seeing nothing from this government. So now that international war crimes indictments have been brought down against Benjamin Netanyahu, what will this government do? Will they support full sanctions? Will they support the International Criminal Court? And will they ensure that we bring these criminals to The Hague?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And for me, as I indicated...
Okay, committee started. All right.
It's meeting number 154 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Yes, I'll get you in 2 seconds, Mr. Brock. Just very quickly, a gentle reminder, please keep your earpieces away from your microphones at all times so we can protect the hearing of our very valued interpreters. Also, do not touch your microphone at all. Mr. Brock, go ahead quickly.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to remind all colleagues that during the last appearance of Tom Clark at this committee, he indicated that he'd be willing to be put under oath to reiterate his talking points. With that being said, I'd be seeking unanimous consent from all committee members that Mr. Clark, prior to his opening statement, be given the opportunity to either swear to tell the truth or affirm to tell the truth, Mr. Chair.
We're fine with that. Mr. Clark, I understand you have the text. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Hello, Mr. Clark. Would you like to perform an oath or solemn affirmation, sir?
Affirmation, please.
Okay, so please repeat after me. I, Tom Clark, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly affirm.
I, Tom Clark, do solemnly and sincerely affirm
and declare the taking of any oath is according to my religious belief unlawful.
And declare the taking of any oath according to my religious belief unlawful.
And I do also solemnly, sincerely, and truly affirm.
And I do also solemnly, sincerely, and truly affirm.
And declare that the evidence I shall give on this examination.
And declare that the evidence I shall give on this examination.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Welcome back. We'll start with a 5-minute statement from yourself. Go ahead, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here in support of the committee's important work to ensure the full accountability and transparency of government operations, including those of Global Affairs Canada. Today, I will speak to my role as Consul General to New York and clarify any remaining questions you may have. As Consul General, I am mandated to advocate for Canada's interests in the 5-state territory of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Connecticut. This region has a combined GDP of more than $6 trillion and two-way trade with Canada of more than $200 billion a year. The consulate is one of Canada's most important missions in the United States and in Canada's global network abroad. Une résidence officielle est l'un des éléments.
An official residence is one component of the diplomatic toolkit used by countries around the world. For the New York consulate, events hosted at the official residence foster partnerships between American business and political leadership and Canadian federal, provincial, and business leaders. With the world focused on the changing administration in the United States, these relationships and the economic opportunities they generate are more important than ever. Upon my arrival at the consulate in February 2023, I began hosting events in the official residence to build these networks and create opportunities to advance the political and economic interests of Canadians. As we have learned, Canada's official residence in New York was purchased in 1961 and last renovated in 1982, more than 40 years ago. While hosting events at the official residence to advance Canada's interests, I observed that the property could not appropriately accommodate guests with mobility issues and posed challenges between the family and representational space. I was informed that these concerns were in line with deficiencies reported to Global Affairs Canada headquarters since 2014.
So you saw the old property and said you didn't like it.
I did not provide input to the headquarters-led multi-year process to address the deficiencies of the official residence. With respect to previous questions from the committee regarding a report prepared by the department's Property Bureau in April of 2023, I want to be clear that I was unaware that any mention of my observations had been included as part of the mission's input to the property team. Any mention from the mission referencing my views on the state of the official residence were the result of an indirect, third-hand report of a remark made to a colleague. This in no way constituted an effort to influence a complex departmental process initiated in 2014, that is, 8 years prior to my arrival. As all officials who have come before this committee have stated, the property project for the official residence was led by Global Affairs Canada headquarters. The decision to relocate the residence was taken in Ottawa, based on a detailed financial analysis and needs assessment overseen by a governance structure designed to prevent against any undue influence. As with all departmental property decisions, this process followed a strict set of guidelines and requirements designed to ensure that decisions are based on value for money and long-term benefits for Canadians. As we have heard, Canada's new official residence is smaller, it's cheaper, and it's accessible. In closing, I did not seek, nor have the opportunity to exert influence or direct the department's ongoing consideration of the residence, nor did I exert any influence or direction on the purchase of the new residence.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. We will start with Mr. Barrett, but please, I'm going to remind everyone, because we have short time with Mr. Clark today, to please watch your clocks so we do not go over time. Mr. Barrett, the floor is yours for 6 minutes, please.
On November 5th, news broke about your involvement in the purchase of the $9 million condo on Billionaires Row. And then, having been found out, you sent a letter, and the letter said, I was not aware until media reports this week that the comments made in passing to a colleague had been reported by the Consulate General to the Global Affairs Canada property team. Let me give you an example of a comment made in passing, Mr. Clark. Hey, that meeting didn't go so well. Now, let me give you an example of someone who holds the most senior position at an organization telling their team that the facilities for them to live in and for them to work in were insufficient. And that's what you did, sir. Isn't that right?
Mr. Chair, as previous testimony has shown, the concerns about the official residence, let's call it the old official residence, have been around since 2014. I was
there, Mr. Clark. The difference, sir, is that you got the job and then the condo got bought. That's the difference. This isn't about what happened 8 years ago. What we need to know, sir, is why you didn't tell the truth. Sir, why you lied to committee the last time you were here. Why did you do that?
Mr. Chair, the evidence that I have given this committee has been consistent with the evidence that every other witness has given to this committee. It is straightforward and it is simple. That's
not true. And let me display for you some of the evidence that comes from your own department. First of all, there's the ATIP that was the subject of that November 5th story that was published. And in it, it says, the current CNGNYHOM, that's you, expressed concerns regarding the completion of the kitchen and refurbishment project and indicated the unit was not suitable to be the Consul General's accommodations, and it does not have an ideal floor plan for the Consul General representational activities. That's not what you said when you were here last time. And you were asked pointedly. And, you know, one of the Liberal members helpfully asked, did you at any time talk to anyone regarding a desire for relocation? Mr. Thomas Clark, quote, never. Well, now we know that's not true. We know, in fact, that you did make the comments. And you just didn't know that it was captured in official briefing notes. So you just didn't know that you knew that you made the comments, you just didn't know you got caught. Isn't that right?
Mr. Chair, as every other witness has testified, and as I have testified, this process has been going on for a long time. As I testified to this committee, I did not ask for or request a change of residence. I will restate that now. But this has been a process that has been led by Global Affairs Headquarters Property Division in Ottawa.
Sir, let me tell you, when the head of the organization, and you described the importance of the mission, of which you're the head of, you described how important it is. For you to get things done, I don't imagine you need to directly instruct individual members of your team to do them. You need to identify that there's a problem, and then the team engages to solve it. That's how it works. This isn't some comment made in passing. And again, you talk about the evidence. Well, let's talk about the June 17th email from Emily Nicholson. And Ms. Nicholson says that the head of mission and staff have been instrumental throughout this process, with the head of mission, that's you, providing the green light for the selection of the new residents. Now, we know that once this scandal ended up in front of a parliamentary committee, that damage control was engaged, and Ms. Nicholson swallowed herself whole, saying that you had nothing to do with it. Well, I imagine when when she was trying to save her job, that's exactly what she would say. But there are now multiple data points that didn't come from admissions from you or your staff, but came from accessed information demands and document production orders from this committee that revealed that you were involved, that your champagne tastes weren't being met with the recently modified shared representational space at the mission, nor with the multi-million-dollar condo on Billionaires Row. With my last 30 seconds, sir, we know that you're not going to resign for having bought a $9 million condo on Billionaires Row and having personally initiated that process. Will you resign for lying to a parliamentary committee?
Mr. Chair, what the evidence I have given to this committee consistently is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Too bad the facts don't back that up.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll now go to Mr. Jawari for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome back, Mr. Tom Clark, and thank you for making yourself available. The member of parliament who our colleague MP Barrett was quoting was me, and I'm going to go back to the same line of questioning that I had very shortly, and I want to pivot to something a lot more important. So given the fact that you are now agreed to be under oath, I'm going to pose to you the same question that I posed last time you were here. And I'm going to probably edit it a bit, but Mr. Clark, did at any time you exert influence in the purchase of the new building and the divestment of the old building?
No, I did not.
Did you at any time shown any interest in or desire, let me reword, did you show at any time the desire to move from the old building into the new building for a personal reason?
No, I did not.
Okay. I'm not sure how to else ask the question. Did the Prime Minister at any time, did you have a conversation with the Prime Minister to say, hey, look, you know, it's time for me to move?
I never had a conversation with the Prime Minister about the old residents or the new residents at any time.
Your mic's muted, buddy. Your mic is muted.
Put it into the report that we are hoping to publish very soon. I want to go back to another line of questioning. About 2 weeks ago, we had an election in U.S., and as you clearly indicated in your opening remarks, $6 trillion of trade, twice the GDP of Canada, $200 billion of trade coming just from your office, and that's almost 50% of our government budget, if you want to put it into perspective for Canadians, twice the GDP of Canada, and 50% of the government's budget is something that you're managing. Can you tell me what you've been doing for the past 2 weeks as a result of this change to get ready?
my team and myself have been extremely busy, as you can imagine. This week alone, I was on a 2.5-day outreach trip into Pennsylvania, which took me to Erie, which took me to Pittsburgh, multiple meetings in both places. Right after this testimony, I'm off to Philadelphia for more meetings and giving a speech tonight in Philadelphia. Our object right now is to talk to as many people as we possibly can in the United States, fulfilling our mandate here of promoting and protecting Canadian interests in the United States. And to give everybody an idea of the 5 states that I'm responsible for, in 4 of those states, 4 of the biggest states, Canada is the #1 customer of all those states, far and above, beyond any other customers around the world. That is the level of importance that Canada has in this region, and that is what we are continuing to promote and to protect.
Thank you. How closely are you working with the committee that the committee of the ministers, that the cabinet ministers, that the Prime Minister has put together? How closely are you working with them vis-a-vis your jurisdiction?
So what I do is I feed information and analysis and intelligence through a system. So I don't deal directly with the committee, but I deal with our ambassador in Washington. I deal with global affairs in Ottawa, in what we call the NGM. And it is my job to provide advice to the government, but through the structures that are in place. So I don't directly talk to the cabinet committee. Nor have I. I don't talk to cabinet, but I do feed information.
I'm sure our G7 partners are also preparing for this transition within 2 months, and I'm sure there are a lot of conversation going among consulate generals. Can you share some light around the dynamic and the level of engagement Canada has as a key player within the G7?
Yeah, we have probably one of the most dynamic missions in New York. This is the only area that I can really talk about because it's one I know. We're the largest here in New York because of the size of our relationship with the United States. And I think, as I've stated previously, we have many friends around the world in many different organizations, but here in New York, friends they may be, but they're also competitors. And so there is a friendly competition, if you want. Obviously, a place like New York is where Canadian companies would find investment money, find the ability to grow, to create more jobs. And so we see it as our job, both at the federal level and provincial level and even the municipal level, to help Canadians at whatever level they're trying to engage New York on.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola now, please.
Oh,
Merci,
man. Sinclair,
Mr.
Sinclair Desjardins is
and
better.
thank you, Mr. Clark, for being with us again. I have a few short questions very quickly. When you came before the committee, and I reread the testimony, you said continually that you were not involved in the decision-making process. So my question is as follows. Do you make a distinction between being involved in a decision-making process and expressing an opinion? I like French very well, but just to be more clear, I will speak in my mother tongue.
I don't make the distinction on an operational basis. In other words, the decisions that are made by divisions in Global Affairs Canada, I have nothing to do with when it comes to the property. In terms of comments that are made, casual comments that are made about whether it be the office, whether it be the residence, I don't see a connection between those two. And certainly, they were never, ever intended to try and sway anything. And Madame, I just want to repeat very, very quickly, at no time did I ask that we change residences. And I think that's an important point.
Merci. Thank you. We also learned in recent meetings that you visited the residence on 57th Avenue. Did you make those visits before or after the purchase agreement was signed by Global Affairs?
I made that visit after we had made the offer to buy, and I believe, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact date with me, I know that the official signature to buy the property was made in June. I had one visit to the property after we had made the offer to buy. So between those 2 points is where I first saw the residence.
Merci beaucoup. Donc,
Thanks very much. So your visit, even though if you said that residence was not appropriate, the offer had already been signed and the decision made.
The offer had been signed. The offer had been made. That is correct. The signature to finalize the purchase came later.
So when you visited after the offer to buy was signed, if you had said, no, this is not an appropriate place, that wouldn't have changed anything. Is that correct?
That is correct. It wouldn't have changed a thing.
Merci.
Thank you. We also have learned that the average that there was a $1.6 million average for purchases, and that would be for a studio, a bachelor apartment. And obviously, a consul general could live there if there was no family, no children, and so on. But is that something that could have been a possibility, and would that be adequate in the longer term, 60 years from now, for example? Could you see a small apartment being appropriate in the longer term to do business in New York?
No, I don't, and let me explain why. Once again, as I said, we're in a competitive environment here. This residence for the Consul General is a working residence. So it's part of what we do in terms of whether we have dinners, whether we have meetings, seminars, receptions, all sorts of things. And if you take a look at where our competitors are, such as the United Kingdom, who I think spent $26 million American on their residence. I think the Italians spent $35 million on theirs. And I'm talking American dollars, and in American dollars, we spent $6.5 million. So you can see already we are much smaller, much more compact, and maybe more efficient than our competitors are. But a small personal apartment.
Thank you. I have one last question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just have a little time. So you said that you shared an opinion just with another member of your colleague. So what is how is the space divided between family and official use?
Answer, please.
The family space is very small. The official space is very big. That's as briefly as I can put it.
Thanks very much. Mr. Boulris, please.
Oui, merci, monsieur le...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Clark, for being with us again today. Mr. Clark, in answer to the repeated question from this committee, you were clear in saying that, or you were asked, in fact, whether you spoke to anybody about the need to relocate. You said, no, never. So you can understand why our committee is a bit troubled, because you seem to have misled us, because there are reports that indicate that you repeatedly expressed misgivings about the former residence, saying it was inadequate, and you shared that opinion with members of your staff and say that that was just impromptu comments. So it turns out that what you said before is not true, even if you made occasional opinions and you didn't mean them to be interpreted as directives. Why did you say to the committee that you didn't talk to anyone about relocating?
Well, Mr. Chair, I did not talk to anybody about relocating. My comments, casual as they may have been, were directed towards what I had to work with at 550 Park in Unit 12E. I noted that there were problems with the furniture, for example, that made it very difficult for people with mobility or accessibility issues to use that furniture. I expressed that the family space was, and this goes a little bit further to explaining what I meant by that, there is in that apartment no designated family space other than the bedrooms. Everything else is representational. I brought this up to say, as we have heard in previous testimony from officials of global affairs, this is not an uncommon comment for incoming heads of mission to say. It is a problem with many official residences.
Je comprends votre point.
I understand your perspective, but when you say...
Une réponse précédente. Je n'ai pas demandé...
You said, I did not ask to have relocation, but you can understand that if you say to staff that the space isn't appropriate, the furniture isn't appropriate, it is inaccessible, and so on, and it isn't good for family space, that could easily be interpreted as a desire to relocate.
Mr. Chair, I want to repeat again that the process for relocating an official residence is not in the hands of the local head of mission nor the staff of the mission in New York. It is entirely in the hands of the property division in Ottawa.
Question de mon collègue, Monsieur Jouari.
Mr. Jouari, my colleague, asked the question as to whether you ever spoke to this of this to anyone. You can understand that we as a committee are feeling that we've been misled.
Mr. Chair, I can assure the member that everything that I have said is, and it is now, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The decision to buy and sell the residences was taken by Ottawa. I had no role in that. I did not exert any influence, nor did I have the ability to exert any influence.
Dans ce cas-là, Monsieur Clark.
In that case, Mr. Clark, would you say that the new residence that has been purchased meets the criteria that you felt were important?
Global Affairs Canada informs me that the new residence meets all the criteria that they have.
All right, get me to Brock.
Vous êtes davantage satisfait de la nouvelle...
So are you happier with the new residence than with the former one?
Mr. Chair, you'll understand it's not a question of my happiness. It wasn't a question of my unhappiness or my happiness. I go where I am told to go. Global Affairs has decided that a process took place that they wanted to move the residents. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right, man.
How much time do I have left? A minute. When we talk about the tools needed by the Consul General, to what extent is this residence a fundamental tool for your work?
That's a good question. I find it very helpful for the type of work that I do. Very often we convene, for example, dinners on particular subjects. We have access to some of the top brains in the United States, and we put them together with Canadians, with Quebecers, with people from other provinces. And it is a way of us finding a way in this very noisy environment in New York to be relevant to the conversation in North America. So it's a very important tool for me.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Brock, please, for 5 minutes.
Brockinator, baby.
Tom Clark, at your last appearance, you were emphatic when you stated you had nothing to do with the decision to sell the old official residence. You had nothing to do with the decision to buy the new official residence. You had nothing to do with deciding on its amenities or its location. So let's cut to the chase. Since 2014, plans to repair the old luxurious official residence on Park Ave were ongoing and repairs commenced. No other prior head of mission demanded an immediate replacement. On February 23, 2023, your buddy Justin Trudeau appoints you head of mission in New York City. On April the 27th, same year, just a few months later, you host a reception for your buddy. You post a video to social media of the two of you in a limousine. In and around the same time, you and your office inform GAC officials, pursuant to an ATIP, that the property is not suitable for representational activities, it's not suitable as a residence, and I'm going to highlight this, requires immediate replacement. I have it right here, ATIP, black and white, Tom Clark. No other head of mission to New York City had issued that directive before other than you, Tom Clark. We also have the infamous email dated June 17, 2024 from Emily Nicholson. States both CNGNY and HOM, that's you, Tom Clark, and staff have been instrumental throughout the process, with the head of mission, you, Tom Clark, providing the green light for the selection of the new residents. After your lies were exposed, you wrote to this committee. You tried to explain that your comments to officials were made in passing. Well, Tom Clark, that's another lie. Comments made in passing might include, how's the weather? How was your weekend? I guess my appearance at committee is not going very well today, but those are passing comments. You issued a mandated direction to your staff that was communicated to GAC officials that the official residence on Park Avenue needed an immediate replacement. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Chair, I feel I've got to correct the record here. Let me start by saying there was never a directive or a mandate from me to my staff whatsoever.
Let's talk about who in your office you spoke with, because I'm also looking at an article from the National Post. You indicating you're quoted, I also observed the issues between family and representational spaces. I shared these views with Consulate General Administration. So who in administration did you communicate with? Names, please, and positions.
When I first saw the residents...
Names, please. Names.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, when I first saw the residents, I was in the company
Clark, it's a direct question. Who are the officials in your office that you spoke with and raised these concerns? Give me names, please.
Mr. Chair, I'm trying to tell you that. I am trying to say that when I arrived in New York and I saw the residents for the first time, I was...
The history, Mr. Clark. Just give me the names of the officials in your office you spoke with. It is not a difficult question. For the third time, give me names.
Mr. Chair, for the third time, I will say that when I made those comments, I was in the residence. I was not in the office. The people in the residence were the ones greeting me at the time. One was our MCO, who was Mario Bott. And quite frankly, I can't remember who else were there. I think there were about 3 or 4 other people, mainly from the property section of New York.
Table all the names of the individuals you spoke with, where you highlighted deficiencies in the official residence, whether in the residence itself, the staff, and your staff at your office in Manhattan. Will you table those names and those positions, including their email addresses, to this committee, yes or no?
Well, Mr. Chair, I will do my very best to try and remember who
You
was
also
in that meeting.
indicate that the comment you made about immediate replacement was made in passing to a colleague and reported to Consulate General at Global Affairs. Who was that colleague?
Mr. Chair, I never made that comment.
You're quoted in the National Post, so you can take that up with the National Post. Now, it's very clear that GAC officials earlier this week confirmed how important your mission is. You, as head of mission, are the most important official in that residence, and what you say carries great weight. So, Tom, you influenced your staff because you indicated to your staff that your champagne tastes were not suitable anymore for Park Avenue, and you needed that wonderful Central Park view on Billionaires Row. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Chair, everything that is said is inaccurate.
Thank you. That's our time. We'll go to Mr. Baines now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Consul General Clark for once again joining our committee to clarify and answer these questions. Mr. Clark, my hometown is Richmond, British Columbia. And it's the cornerstone of this city is the fishing industry. In Steveston, we have the largest commercial fishing harbor in Canada,
what does that have to do with
which
the condo?
offloads approximately 100 million pounds of seafood, fish annually. And we just recently established, the harbor recently established another new business offloading another 4 million pounds of crab, Dungeness crab, and a new processing plant has been set up there. Yeah, I'm curious about our seafood and fish trade on the eastern seaboard there. You know, how if you can maybe talk a little bit about that. Industry, that sector, and the impacts that may have on the trade between the states that you've recognized earlier today, on with that amounted to the $325 billion trade you talked about.
Agriculture and aquaculture are big industries, and it is being recognized as such in the investment community here in the United States, and frankly also in the restaurant industry here in New York. And, you know, there's thousands of restaurants here. We have hosted, for example, Prince Edward Island. The Premier of Prince Edward Island came down with a delegation, and we helped them make contact with both food distributors and restaurants here in New York. It was a very successful trade mission. We've also done the same, for example, and this is a little outside of the fishery industry, but we have hosted Ontario wines and Quebec wines and Nova Scotia wines here in New York as a way of connecting them to the larger ecosystem, both financially and in terms of the hospitality industry in New York. So I would simply agree with you, sir, that this is a very big and important business for Canada down here.
Yeah, it amounts to about $200 million of economic impact just in our region here in the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. So I was just curious to see how much of an impact that may have on those eastern states. With respect to, you talked a little bit about competitiveness. Maybe if you can talk to us about the official residence there in New York. And we know now we have a new administration coming in where many of our allied nations, G7 nations, will need to establish newer relationships as we see new members of the new administration are being appointed. Many who may not have pre-established relationships with some of these nations, and we need to find our way and make sure that we remain competitive. We are at the forefront at some of these discussions. So maybe if you can talk about will there be more activity all of a sudden at this residence? And maybe take your time. Explain, please.
Yeah, I think that all of our diplomatic tools are now going to be used more than they've ever been used before. We're engaging with the new administration. We're engaging with, as I said at the beginning, with as many Americans, both inside and outside the political process as we possibly can. Forgive me. We are at a point where to defend and protect and promote Canada's interests in the United States means all hands on deck. We have a story to tell. We've got interest to protect. We want to promote Canadian business, as you were just talking about with the Lower Mainland and the fishing industry that exists there. And as with any new administration coming in, there are new players, there are new ideas, there are new thoughts, and we want to intersect with all of those. And in the process of doing that, tell Canada's story. To go directly to the question you're asking about the use of the official residence, this is really Canada's house in New York. This is where people come from all walks of life in New York, and they walk into Canada's house. It is there that we exchange ideas, where we tell our story, where we promote ourselves as true allies, friends, and partners in North America, promoting the North American vision of what we are and who we want to be collectively. I envisage that new
I'm
residence...
afraid we're well past our time, Mr. Clark. Thanks very much, Mr. Baines, Mr. Clark. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola, but before we start, there's a fair amount of noise in the room. If everyone can keep it down, please. Mrs. Vignola, the floor is yours for 2.5, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. From what I understand, Mr. Clark, you made a comment to the effect that, well, rather, you wanted it to be informal, and you weren't intending for it to reach global affairs. Is that correct?
That is correct.
OK. À ce moment-là,
that being the case, I have a question for you, and I just have a couple of minutes left. So my question is, how could it be avoided in the future, this kind of situation where we're all dealing now with this event? What advice should be given to consuls general, to the staff at Global Affairs, so that there is a very clear distinction between an informal opinion that is not at all intended to influence a decision or a process, and something that is? Do you have any recommendations in that regard?
It's a very good question. I think that I would answer it this way, briefly, that the process needs to remain the process. I think that anybody coming into a new residence, you can't prevent somebody saying, wow, this is nice, or wow, this is bad. But I think that there has to be an understanding on the part of everybody, as there is now and as there was here in New York, that the process is entirely in the hands of Ottawa. I don't think it would befit any head of mission to walk in and ask for a new residence. I can't imagine anybody would do that. I certainly didn't do that. But I think that, to your point, Madame, that perhaps Homs should be told the obvious, and that is, don't interfere with your with the decisions that are properly being made elsewhere.
Thank you very much. That's our time. Mr. Boulerice, please.
Oui, Monsieur Clark.
Mr. Clark, I am pleased to have you here today because I want to ask you a question about something that is of great concern to Canadians and Quebecers, and that is the arrival of the new Trump administration. And there has been there have been very clear indications about protectionism, the imposition of tariffs, the conditions for renegotiating the U.S., Mexico, and Canadian Accord, the CUSMA, and I just wondered what you are doing in that regard.
What we are doing is talking to as many people as we possibly can. This is a time when I think this is a wonderful occasion for education. And what I find, quite frankly, when I'm dealing with issues here in the United States, so often we're pushing against an open door. There's not real resistance to dealing with Canada. It is a matter of educating people about who we are, what we bring to the table. I work closely, for example, with the Délégué Général du Québec ici à New York. We work collaboratively in terms of advancing both Canadian and Quebec interests here in New York. So on all the above questions that you asked, I think that the answer is that we need engagement, we need to talk, and we need to tell the Canadian story.
Well, just in conclusion, the U.S. is a federal state and the federal government has a strong role, but I would like to hear from you about the role of the states in our trade relations with our partners in the U.S.
Great question. Extremely important. As I said earlier, 4 of my 5 states, we are the #1 customer in all those states by a wide margin. When you take a look at the central issue of energy, for example, Hydro-Quebec is building a line into New York City that within a year and a half is going to provide 20% of the electrical needs of New York City. That's enormous, and that's coming from Quebec. And that is a real, excuse the expression, connector between the two places. So when you deal at the state level and at the county level, you're dealing with very important on-the-ground decisions that really mean something to people. And that is, that's very satisfying for me.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
And we'll go to Mrs. Block, and then we'll finish with Mr. Sousa. Mrs. Block, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Clark, for joining us today. It would appear that your testimony today is consistent with that you made at your first appearance here at committee, in which you continue to deny having any involvement in the purchase process for the new official residence, and that you made no direct complaints about the state of the current residence. Is that correct?
I made no direct complaint to the process. That is correct.
To the process, I'll note that. So to be clear, in response to my colleagues' questions, you testified that it was upon your arrival to the most important mission that Canada has, the first comments you made to those welcoming you were to express concerns about the residence that you were in fact going to be living in. And I'll refer back to the ATIP. I won't quote it because my colleague already did that. But the first comments you made to those welcoming you were to express concerns regarding the completion of the renovation and the refurbishment project. You indicated it was not suitable to be the Consul General's accommodations and that it did not have a floor plan that was ideal for representational activities. You went on to say, and you've testified again today, that somehow there is absolutely no connection to making these comments that were made to those greeting you, that there is absolutely no connection to the actions that took place and the decisions that were made following that. You know, while you refuse to see the connection, I think your staff certainly understood the mission. They understood what they were hearing, and they absolutely understood that you were not happy with the accommodations, you were making those observations right off the get-go, and that they needed to do something about that. You've also stated time and time again that you did not ever talk to anyone about this, and yet in your own letter, and you refused to admit that these comments were made to a colleague, and you said you didn't say that. It's in your letter. Did you write the letter that was sent to this committee?
Mr. Chair, I did.
So in this letter, you said, I was not aware until media reports this week that this comment made in passing to a colleague had been reported by the Consulate General. So my colleague had asked who that colleague was, and you said, I didn't make these comments to a colleague. Which is it? Did you speak to a colleague or did you not?
Mr. Chair, I did, but perhaps just for precision, could you ask me what comments you're referring to? Because if the comments you're referring to are me saying we need a new residence, that simply is not true.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to interrupt you there, Mr. Clark, because this letter that you sent was all about the issue of the kind of influence that you may have exerted over the purchase of this condominium. And so if you want to try and distract and confuse, I'm just going to use the time that I have to keep us on task here. We have received emails and official documents that indicated you were instrumental in getting the ball rolling on the purchase of the new residence. That's why you hurriedly wrote this letter, to say that the comments that were made were only made in passing. And I think we've already debunked that theory that you were only making comments in passing, especially since they were comments made upon your arrival. We also have the official report from Global Affairs Canada. So you see, Mr. Clark, the issue that we are facing here is that you have obviously and shamelessly lied to this committee on multiple occasions. And so my question for you right now is, why don't you just come clean with this committee and Canadians, admit you've lied, follow in Randy Boissonneau's footsteps, and resign?
Indeed. Good job, Kelly.
You have 20 seconds, Mr. Clark.
Mr. Chair, I would say once again, and I am under oath, I can tell you that everything I have said is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
It's the remaining seconds I have to my colleague.
Thank you. Given this testimony, I'm looking for unanimous consent, then, Chair, to call Mr. Mario Bott, Mr. Christopher Vistra, and the author of the International Platform Report, Ms. Christy Vliet. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
No.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Clark, thanks for being here, and I just wanted to verify a couple of things. I'm just going to reset my time so I can monitor this. A lot of allegations are being made against you. A lot of people are trying to accuse you of lying. And a lot of others are trying to misinform the issue.
Sorry, I'm going to stop the clock. We have interpretation issue. Hold on, Mr. Sousa. Okay. Is this working? Go ahead, Tross.
I'll reset. So, Mr. Clark, do you have anything to gain by the purchase and sale of this property?
Mr. Chair, this property was not bought for me. It was bought for Canada. It will be the residence of consuls generals for many decades to come. It was not bought for me. What else can I say?
Mr. Clark, the former consul generals before you, have they not related and conveyed the status of the former residence to other officials about its state of affairs?
Yes, going back to at least 2014.
I have had the opportunity to use that residence on many occasions in the past with conservative appointed consul generals who complained about the status of that residence in order to accommodate receptions and do the official functions, as well as recognize that there was a need for improvement. Did you feel that when you first moved in?
I think what I felt when I moved in was, number one, I didn't accept this commission on behalf of Canada because of the accommodation. I went where I was told to go.
Yeah, right.
I made casual comments about the usefulness of it, I never, ever said that we should sell it, we should move on, we should do anything other than just a normal, casual observation when you walk into a new place and you see what it is, especially after you've used it for a couple of times.
So Mr. Clark, I guess my point being,
Need to make a cup of Joe.
as the tenant of the resident, it's appropriate to discuss the status of the property in order to accommodate the use of that property for yourself and your staff. I think members in the opposition do that all the time with their offices and their residences, right, and their appropriations of allocation of those resources. At the same time, Mr. Clark, when you have those discussions, is it appropriate as the tenant to share them?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what would be wrong with that. Again, it's outside of a process. It has nothing to do with the process of looking at buying or selling residences. It's simply where you end up and what you see.
So, Mr. Clark, I'm going to just ask these questions again. Did you have influence in making the decision to sell or buy?
No.
Did you actually approve any decisions to sell or buy?
No.
Did you have discussions with elected officials or the senior management of the process to determine the sale or the buy?
No.
Are you aware that a number of properties were reviewed in order to make that decision?
Yes.
Did you visit all the locations that were being assessed?
No.
In regards to the residence that is there now, is it now up for sale?
It is.
Do you know how much or what approximate value would be netted to the taxpayer?
Again, I'm not part of that process. My understanding is it's about $13 million, but I think previous testimony has covered that.
It certainly has. And the property that you're now being forced to move into, frankly, is it less expensive than the one you're in now or that you were in previously?
It is my understanding that this will save millions of dollars.
Approximately $7 million in the net sale and buy, and something like $115,000 a year just in savings. Is that that's what we're told, Mr. Clark? And that's a substantive improvement and benefit to Canadians and taxpayers. Would you agree?
I would think that's a good thing, yes.
Are you able to continue with your role in the new residence because it's a prominent position and certainly is required by other provinces, other premiers, other members of governments throughout Canada? Is it a more accessible location, a more effective use of government use of space?
Yes, Canada is open for business on West 57th.
And I am told that I have to wrap up. Mr. Clark, thank you for your service and your time, and I appreciate you doing the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Mr. Sousa, thank you very much. Mr. Clark, thank you for being with us again. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for a few minutes to excuse Mr. Clark and set up for our next panel. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Tom Clark's only in there for the first hour. The second hour, we've got... let me double check to see. I think we might even tune into another committee because I think the second hour is just boring stuff. It's about the bilingual status of 24 additional post offices in the GTA. So I think we can skip that, and we can actually probably head over to the one Cooper's in, which is Proc. And let me see what Proc's covering today. I forgot about that. Because yeah, the second half of this committee is going to be boring for Ogo. Yeah, let's tune into Proc.
Muted. You've got your microphone kind of midway between your nose and your mouth, and the 5-minute clock will begin now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, committee. I have studied and researched privacy protection nationally and internationally for over 40 years. And in recent work, I've researched the uses and abuses of personal data in election campaigns. And I wish to address my remarks entirely to the requirements of Section 444 on the personal information collected by federal political parties. Firstly, I doubt whether the Elections Act is the appropriate statutory vehicle for imposing privacy obligations on federal political parties. Contemporary privacy law is complex and requires far more than the obligations for transparency included in Bill C-65. The required amendments fit uneasily within a statute designed to regulate the conduct and financing of elections. If the government really wanted to establish a national, uniform, exclusive and complete privacy regime for FPPs and the organizations that work for them, in response to the litigation that's currently underway in BC, it would either bring the parties into the current Bill C-27, amending PIPEDA, or legislate a separate national privacy protection statute applying to them. Secondly, privacy law, as the Privacy Commissioner has pointed out to you in his communication, should include all the internationally accepted privacy principles, supplemented with serious and enforceable provisions for oversight and accountability. The current provisions essentially permit the FPPs to collect whatever personal data they wish from whatever sources, to process it in any way they please, provided they're transparent about it, provided they give illustrative examples, and provided they don't sell it. They do not allow individuals any access of right and correction, and these provisions therefore amount to little more than self-regulation, entirely at odds with the contemporary international consensus about how to protect personal information in the modern digital age. Thirdly, contrary to the claim in Section 4441 that these amendments provide for a national, uniform, exclusive and complete privacy regime, and the organizations that work for them, I think they do nothing of the sort. There's a recent report from Open Media based on analysis of national and provincial filings on campaign expenditures, which reveals over 90 companies in Canada that work for political parties at federal, provincial and municipal levels. Nothing in these amendments obliges the political parties to obtain consent when they collect personal data from Canadians. And yet companies that work for the parties under contract and governed by federal and provincial privacy laws must ensure that personal data is collected in compliance with those laws. That's according to a 2019 decision from the BC and Federal Privacy Commissioners. So I think Section 444 is likely to create confusion for the companies that process personal information on behalf of political parties. Fourthly, there really is no meaningful independent oversight. Obligations for compliance are based on the notion that the Chief Electoral Officer could and would cease a party's registration if it did not submit a valid privacy policy. The system for administrative monetary penalties, those who commit violations, is also ineffective. Further, there's no indication of what an individual is supposed to do if he/she is dissatisfied with the response to a complaint from the party's privacy officer. And with all due respect to Elections Canada and the Commission of Canada Elections, I don't think they possess the resources or the expertise to monitor the complex technical environment of modern digital campaigning. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner does, and should be given a collaborative role in the oversight regime, a similar arrangement as exists in BC. Finally, there's no effective mechanism for reporting data breaches. We've already witnessed a number of data breaches from political parties, and they're likely to continue. The current provisions only require the parties to inform the individuals affected if they judge that there is a, quote, real risk of significant harm. There must also be a duty to report such breaches to an independent body, such as the Privacy Commissioner. Canada is just one of a few democratic countries where national privacy law does not apply to political parties and to the sensitive information on political opinions they collect. There is no evidence, despite assertions by the parties, that compliance with these laws in other countries and jurisdictions, including BC and Quebec, hinders political engagement, constrains their ability to recruit volunteers, or otherwise prevents them from communicating with the electorate. And there is also no credible reason why Canadians should enjoy enforceable privacy rights with respect to government agencies and commercial organizations and not with political parties. At root, this issue is not just about privacy rights, it's about the health and resilience of our democracy. Political campaigning is changing dramatically as elections increasingly become more data-driven, and voter analytics, predictive modeling, and artificial intelligence, which you discussed earlier with the Chief Electoral Officer, as those tools drive campaign communications. So the need to develop and apply a strong and consistent set of enforceable privacy rules for federal political parties is urgent, and the provisions in C-65 do not achieve those goals, in my judgment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett. We'll now turn the floor to Mr. Shapiro for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My testimony this morning this afternoon now will address 3 issues. First, the new section 482.01 of Bill C-65 is, in my view, a violation of section 2B of the Charter. This is because it may be utilized in the same manner as the election laws of Hong Kong to repress protected expression of citizens and the media. Number 2, the new section 358 of Bill C-65 does not effectively rule out all spending by foreign actors in Canada to influence federal elections. This is because a sophisticated third party may simply have all donations funded from a foreign actor at least 2 years before a general election. And number 3, the role of the Chief Electoral Officer should be better depoliticized, first by prohibiting the Chief Electoral Officer from changing an interpretation of the Act between elections unless directed otherwise by Parliament or the courts, and number 2, by repealing Part 18, Division 4 of the Canada Elections Act, and that is the part that regulates nomination contests. First, then, I will address freedom of the press. Section 482.01 should not go forward. It should be removed because it is prone to abuse and violates Section 2B of the Charter. Recent election law enforcement in Hong Kong should give members of Parliament pause as they consider the authority that this would give civil servants to regulate expression. Just a week ago, the Canadian media focused intensely on this issue. Section 482 is contrary to 482.01 is contrary to the Charter because it punishes false statements made in connection with the democratic process. In my view, the courts in Canada will not uphold this legislation. Section 482.01 is nothing more than a restatement of the law of sedition, or lèse majesté. The United Kingdom abolished these laws in 2010, and the Belgium Constitutional Court overturned a similar law in 2021 because it violated the Belgium Constitution. In our courts, Justice Pedler in Ontario in 2006, 79 OR 3rd 515 said this about prosecution of defamation action by the government. He said, I find that it is inconsistent with Section 2B of the Charter for a government entity such as the plaintiff here to bring a civil action for defamation against one of its citizens. The risk of a governing body using defamation as a tool to inhibit criticism of institutional government activities and thereby inhibiting free speech outweighs the risks of allowing such criticism, even if intemperate. And then speaking on behalf of a unanimous court, Justice Cote in the Supreme Court of Canada in 1704604 and Points Protection Association, that's 2020 SCR 587, said that even vexatious expression will be protected from slap lawsuits where it involves, quote, public participation in democracy, end quote. And that's at paragraph 30. On the subject of foreign influence, I note that section 349 and 349.4 are going to be amended here. That is a good step. But section 358.1 is undermined by section 358.2 in Bill C-65. And that's because under 358 sub 2, a sophisticated third party could simply avoid all of the limitations of this section by ensuring that third party or foreign actors funded the third party at least 2 years before a scheduled federal election. And finally, I note that with respect to the issue of the participation of the chief electoral officer in the internal governance of a political party has been condemned by the Ontario Court of Appeal in Longley in Canada. That's 2007 Ontario Court of Appeal 852. Paragraph 74 is the operative section or paragraph. In that paragraph, the court said, care should be taken to ensure that the impartiality of this critical public role is not unnecessarily compromised, actually or potentially in the eyes of the public, by enacting a regime that would call upon the chief electoral officer to make judgment calls on how a political party is conducting its internal affairs or spending its money. By including nomination contests.
We're over time, so I'm going to ask you to wrap up right away.
Thank you very much. That's where I will quit. You've got the section, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Professor Powell, over to you for upwards of 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to the committee and to the clerk for the invitation to appear today. I'm a professor down the street in the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa, working in the areas of election law and constitutional law. So there are a number of items of interest in C-65, given what a significant piece of legislation it is. I wanted to focus my comments in the time I have on the same topic as Professor Bennett, the rules around voter privacy, because I think that's an area where amendments would be of use. Political parties, obviously well known to everyone around the table, use data very extensively. Traditionally, federal political parties, though, have fallen in between private and public sector federal privacy legislation. There are some provisions in the Canada Elections Act around misuse of the voters list, but other than that, restrictions were relatively minimal, and certainly nothing approaching what we would understand as the fair information or generally accepted privacy principles that apply through most of the private and public sector. Recent amendments to the Canada Elections Act have been moving towards a privacy regime applicable to political parties, particularly with the Election Modernization Act in 2018, obliging parties to have a policy. And the problem with the Election Modernization Act, it was one step forward, but it did not actually impose substantive limits on the use, collection, retention, analysis of sensitive personal information of the kind that would give Canadians confidence in how their data is collected and used. And so worthwhile going through some specific provisions of C-65, some of which I think are an important step forward, some of which need, in my view, a significant amendment. Section 444.2 will allow authorized parties to, quote, collect, use, disclose, retain, and dispose of personal information, unquote, as long as that is done in accordance with the party's policy. So again, the rule is tied to the particular policy rather than independent principles tied to other privacy values. Parties and entities acting on the party's behalf must comply with the policy or potentially be subject to administrative monetary penalties. Parties must now also protect personal information under their control through, quote, proportionate physical, organizational, and technological security safeguards, unquote. I think that is a positive development, but more definition is likely needed as to what counts as a proportionate safeguard. So that is spelled out more directly in the legislation. Most significantly, parties are now prohibited from carrying on the activity of selling personal information. Parties are prohibited from disclosing sensitive information for the purpose of causing harm. And parties are prohibited from providing false or misleading information about their collection practices. So those three measures, I think, are certainly welcome and a step forward from the 2018 amendments. The main problem that remains, however, is that the amendments are targeted at ensuring that parties and their volunteers and representatives adhere to the party's policy without actually requiring substantive limits on how the data can be collected and used, apart from those specific ones around selling or disclosing. And so, in conclusion, I would say this is an important step forward. More remains to be done. The overall concern certainly is in facilitating democratic participation. It is a good thing for Canadian democracy and elections that parties collect data and use it. Helps with communication to voters, advertising, being responsive to the public. But Canadians have an increasing expectation for how sophisticated entities in Canadian society will protect their data. And there is still some way to go, even if the amendments in C-65 are passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Leela and Ms. Khan, I'm not sure between the two of you who would like to go, but whoever is representing your organization in the opening remarks will have 5
20
minutes
minutes of opening remarks? This is ridiculous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Are they here to just
My name
speak,
is
or are they here to
Elaine
answer
Leela,
questions?
And I currently serve as the Vice Chair of the Indo-Caribbean Canadian Association. In addition, I serve as the chair of the organization's Voice Planning Committee, which is the civic engagement wing of our organization. I'm joined today by Aisha Khan, a board member, a board director of our organization. The Indo-Caribbean Canadian Association was established on May 1st, 2021, with the goal to connect, serve, and amplify Canada's Indo-Caribbean community. We offer a number of community services and programs in an effort to fill a void in our underrepresented and underserved community. The Indo-Caribbean community possesses roots in the Caribbean with ancestry from India. We represent a double diasporic community. Our dynamic culture has contributed to many significant elements of modern Caribbean culture. Our community is also comprised of individuals from a variety of faith groups, including Hindus, Muslims, and Christians, and that is what makes our community so special. I joined the Indo-Caribbean Canadian Association in 2022 to support their efforts to have the date of the municipal elections in Ontario amended because of a conflict with Diwali. While I identify as a Muslim, I recognize the importance of ensuring our collective community's access to the democratic process. Furthermore, I believe that it's important that the right to vote does not conflict with one's participation in a major religious or cultural observance. Whether it's Diwali, Eid, Bandi Chor Divas, Rosh Hashanah, or Easter, we must understand and respect the diversity of our country and ensure that all people are free to participate in their cultural and religious practices while maintaining their access to participation in our democratic institutions. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Aisha Khan.
Thank you, Aleem, and thank you, committee members, for having us here today. Bill C-65 includes several measures to ensure that more Canadians have access to participate in the electoral process. It is of crucial importance to our democracy to work towards eliminating obstacles for Canadians to participate in elections. As a nation that proudly professes to benefit from a multicultural society, we must modernize our democratic institutions to reflect and respect this. When barriers to democracy are identified, progressive societies rectify them. Rightfully, polling stations must be accessible. Voting options must be broader to accommodate the working people. Such is the way of a modern society who respects the voice of the people who comprise it. Ensuring that a general election is not held on Diwali is a significant step toward this. As of 2024, 2.3 million Canadians reported as South Asian in ethnicity. India was the top source for immigrants to Canada between 2016 to 2021.
No surprise
These statistics also do not include the growing Indo-Caribbean community in Canada. The Indo-Caribbean Canadian Association endorses the proposal to move the set election date so as to not conflict with Diwali. In many Caribbean countries like Guyana and Trinidad, Diwali and other religious dates such as Eid and Christmas are national holidays. We are not calling for that today, but we believe our government should recognize the massive significance of Diwali and make it so that Canadians who observe this religious occasion do not have to choose between practicing their religion and their democratic right to vote. It is important to note that this barrier is not limited to voters, but holding an election on Diwali or any major cultural or religious date is unfair to candidates, campaign staff, political organizers, volunteers, supporters, and election staff who observe said occasion. During the Ontario municipal elections held on Diwali in 2022, the City of Brampton had to implement measures
Rappel
to
au
address
règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order. I know that the connection is not very good, and it's very difficult for interpretation. We can sort of decode it in English, but they cannot do their work.
Or your voice is coming in a little bit broken up. There seems to be some weakness in the connection. So I'm going to turn it back over to you again for just a minute to finish your remarks. If we run into the situation whereby the connection remains a little bit finicky, then we may just have to have you submit in writing the final portion of your remarks. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, but I'm afraid I may have to interrupt if it isn't clear moving forward.
Thank you. During the Ontario municipal elections held in Diwali in 2022, the City of Brampton had to implement measures to address unprecedented election resignations 24 hours before polls opened. In 2022, I myself helped on a municipal election campaign in my home community. I was in the challenging position of supporting a candidate that I believe in, but I was unable to spend the special evening with my family. I know I'm not alone in this. I recall seeing on election night as I went door to door traversing the community, residents leaving the house and lined up to vote in traditional garb. Cars pulled out of driveways already lined with traditional lamps. And despite the observance, there were folks in my community who felt it important to participate in their democratic right to vote. I believe that no one should have to make that choice. Moreover, amending an election date is not a new concept in Canada. In 2007, the Ontario government amended the election date from October 4th to October 10th because of a conflict with the Jewish holiday of Shemini Atzeret, on which some members of the Orthodox Jewish community would be unable to vote.
Sorry, Ms. Khan, but unfortunately we've just run into the same issue. There were 10 seconds remaining in your introductory remarks. So what I'll ask is for your own benefit and the benefit of the committee, if you can just submit to the clerk the opening statement, who she mentions to me we have already. We'll be sure to distribute that to the committee so that they have the opportunity to be fully informed of what message you were intending to convey. With that, colleagues, we are going to enter into our first round of questioning, and I will turn the floor to Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll direct my questions to Mr. Chippier. With respect to the third-party regime and the influence of foreign money, this act proposes to require third parties to set up separate bank accounts like political parties and candidates at election time, but it would only apply where the third party received more than 10% of its revenue from within the previous calendar year. That, as you noted, leaves a significant loophole with the potential for a third party to use foreign money to influence voters during the pre-writ and writ periods. Would it be your recommendation that the solution to that is simply to require third parties to set up a separate bank account and rely on individual contributions during the pre-writ and writ periods for regulated expenditures?
That's exactly my recommendation. Just simply drop section or subsection 2.
Okay, thank you very much for that. In the previous hour, the Chief Electoral Officer answered questions that I posed to him with respect to changes around special ballots. Presently, one must write in the name of the candidate. Under this bill, a voter could instead simply write in their preferred political party. And I asked the Chief Electoral Officer in the hypothetical that if a candidate was standing on day one and the voter marked Conservative Party, but before the candidate filing deadline, the Conservative Party had replaced the candidate with a different candidate, the vote indicating preference for the Conservative Party would be counted towards that second candidate. This seems to me to turn upside down the process that we have had in terms of electing members of Parliament and not voting for political parties. It seems to me to be inconsistent with the statutory scheme and arguably constitutionally questionable. Would you agree?
I would agree. There are three things that there's three concerns that I would have with that approach. The first is Section 3 of the Charter. The whole idea of the right to vote is individual, and the right to run is individual, and the statute itself is a statute that talks about individual members of Parliament being elected. If an individual is elected as a member of Parliament, they are not required to stay with the party that they came to Parliament with.
Yeah, true.
So those are the three concerns. One is the statute itself talks about electing individuals. Number two, the individuals, once elected, are free to go to any party. And number three, the Charter itself sets up rights that are individual in nature. The approach of putting a party name in seems to be, at least from my perspective, I don't have any case law on this, but it seems inconsistent with all three of those approaches.
Thank you for that. You raised issues with respect to Section 482.01, which establishes new offenses under the Act. You stated it is your opinion, and you cited case law, that it could contravene or would likely be found by the courts to contravene Section 2B of the Charter. I'll invite you to elaborate on that if you wish, but I would also ask you whether you would also have the concern that these new offenses could create a chilling effect that perhaps is unintended with respect to questions, legitimate questions around electoral processes.
Absolutely, and that is indeed the concern that was raised by Justice Pedler, I believe, in the Ontario courts. The idea that one can be prosecuted for what one says, and then the onus shifts to the individual, in a sense. Like, certainly the legal onus stays with the government, but the onus would be on the individual to prove the truth of what they were saying, because if it was false, and they knew, quote, that it was false, then they could be prosecuted without going into the issue of whether or not they were successful in defending themselves. The cost of defense in and of itself would be so high that individuals would simply comply with the bureaucrat or the chief electoral officer without wanting to take on a battle where the only thing that they want to do is participate in the democratic process. And the democratic process that we're talking about here heightens the review that a court would give to this legislation. In the Supreme Court of Canada, I highlighted the words of Justice Cote, where she said that when we're talking about the democratic process and participation in the democratic process, that kind of expression is entitled to greater protection. And when it comes down to a balance between, let's say, protecting the reputation of an individual or a reputation of an institution of government, the courts should come down on the side of freedom of expression and not on protecting the reputation or the, if you will, the name of the institution or the credibility of the process. There's no doubt that the institution of an election is a very important thing, but the courts have come down on the side of freedom of expression in Canada, and I think that the courts in other free and democratic societies, like Belgium, like the United Kingdom, have also said there's no need to go into the protection of the Crown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. Ms. Romanato, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. Before I begin, I'd like to ask if it's at all possible for both Professor Bennett and Mr. Is it Chippier sorry, the Francophone in me, if it would be possible for you to table your opening remarks with this committee, because I was trying to take notes of all of the references of case law and so on, and I'll be honest with you, it was very difficult to follow, so if it would be possible.
Ms. Romanato, just for the record, the clerk's informed me she has them already, so we'll make sure to get them to you.
Thank you.
He has them, but over the last week, I did add some case law, so I will provide the clerk with the full text.
Thank you very much. So my first question actually is for you, Mr. Chippier. You were starting at the end of your opening statement to talk.
Okay, just for I'm just mute. I usually don't mute the stream, but I'm just gonna mute because after she's done talking, we're gonna call it, and I'm gonna have a little break before question period. As you guys know, question period is always on at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so I'm going to put the link in chat, and I'm going to pin it up to the top as well. And we'll see you guys for question period, just because this committee is a little bit boring, so we're not going to watch this whole thing. Here's the question period link, and we'll finish up with her round, and we'll call it.
Not necessarily appropriate in the case of the internal operation of a political party. And I think this last week's events in Hong Kong even highlight that more, where the government of Hong Kong was attacking the Democratic Party in Hong Kong because of some internal processes, internal elections that were taking place. And so I think that this decision knocks out of the Court of Appeal of Alberta and the case out of the Court of Appeal of Ontario, Longley. In both of those cases, there is, in my view, support for the view that the chief electoral officer should not be given authority over the internal operations of a political party. The regulatory arm of the state, in this case the chief electoral officer, should kick in at nomination. When you actually have an individual presenting their name for election, that's the time when the regulatory regime should step in. Before that, in my view, it should not.
Thank you very much for clarifying. My next question is for Mr. Powell. Professor Powell. I wanted to get your thoughts on what we've been hearing about disinformation campaigns and misinformation campaigns. Our previous witness was the Chief Electoral Officer, and he had brought up the question about deep fakes, AI, that can impact voters' decision to support or not support a candidate. Could you elaborate a little bit on whether or not you think that C65 addresses some of those issues with respect to misinformation and disinformation, and or would you have any recommendations for us on how to improve that?
Thank you very much for that question. Freedom of political expression is one of the foundational values in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and so we should be very careful in passing electoral legislation that restricts freedom of political expression. Because disinformation and misinformation are now so prevalent and are deliberate tactics, frankly, often by
Trudeau,
foreign actors, state or non-state actors
by
who are
Trudeau.
Hostile to Canadian democracy.
Like 8 out of
these
10.
are very pressing problems. So C65 has made it has clarified that some of the offenses that exist, partly from the Elections Modernization Act, where there was some ambiguity. The language was broad, but it wasn't clear that deepfakes necessarily were covered. So it has clarified that. So I think that is quite welcome. Where I might have a different view than my fellow witness today is on Section 482.01. Again, I'm a constitutional law professor. Start from the point of view we should absolutely protect freedom of political expression. But one of the tactics around the globe by actors hostile to democracy is to try to undermine confidence in the electoral system by spreading disinformation about the quality of the election, how is it administered. And so 482.01, I think, is a useful attempt to try to address some of those concerns.
Okay. Thank you very much. With respect to Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to external threats, as you mentioned, how you elaborate on that is sort of to sow those seeds of distrust in our democracy. We saw that south of the border in the previous elections, where the validity of the election was an issue that was brought up over and over again. Do you think that C-65 goes far enough to ensure that Canadians can have faith in our democracy and faith in our elections? Because we did hear a little bit about the question when we were looking at foreign interference here at PROC on whether or not the outcome of the last federal election was impacted, and we understand from the Chief Electoral Officer that the final results were not impacted. But what are your thoughts on this specific issue of sowing the seed of mistrust on the validity of an election?
Very complex policy question because of the charter, right? And because we do need to respect and want to respect freedom of political expression. Some of the offenses try to get at that issue, offenses around false statements, but that's kind of a blunt tool. It's a tool that I think is important, but it is blunt. And so education campaigns are another kind of softer tool that I think are important. I was invited to be an expert witness to the foreign interference inquiry a couple of weeks ago, and I expressed a similar view here. I agree with my fellow witness that it would not be in the interest of Canada to have Elections Canada run nomination contests. Political parties are and should be independent from the state, but we might want to address some of the campaign finance aspects in nomination contests to a greater degree than we currently do.
Thank you so much. Madame Gaudreau, 6 minutes.
Okay. That's it for this. I don't really want to watch the rest of this. This is a bit boring. There was a couple good things that I think Cooper touched on, and the fact that they're going to allow you to just write Conservative Party of Canada or Liberal Party of Canada instead of picking individual members. And I don't think that that's right, because Cooper made two good points. He said sometimes during the campaign that the Conservative Party will switch out a running person for another one before the actual results are done. And also that person doesn't necessarily like we've seen with a couple of Liberal MPs that went independent. So I think we should always be voting for specific people, not parties. But I probably would have asked about the allowing of changing election dates because of other holidays, like they were talking about Diwali. I mean, there's going to be somebody somewhere that has some holiday, and so there's always going to be an argument for that. Election dates should not be changed based on a religious holiday, in my opinion. I think we've always separated politics and religion. So that's it for this. I really liked the first hour, though. That was pretty fun watching Tom Clark, swindle in his boots again. I appreciate everybody tuning in. You guys know we're doing question period about an hour and 15. So there's the link again in chat. And we will be there for question period. I might be doing the ethics committee after question period as well. We might be covering that. I just want to double check to see. I did see the witnesses and I saw who's going to be in, but I don't know if it's going to be something super interesting. This is why we have advanced polls. Yes, exactly. Exactly, Computer Solutions. Very, very good point. That's why there's advanced polling, because if you do have something to do on that exact day, you could have voted like days prior. Anyway, guys, appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you for question period. We're not going to be live tomorrow. We don't go live on Fridays, but I've been a little bit lazy with clipping stuff and actually putting it on the channel. My apologies there. I'll try and get to that. But there was that issue with Parliament this week, like on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We were constantly having to restart the streams. I didn't change anything today. I did not change anything. It just all of a sudden you guys have noticed for this entire committee, and we haven't had to refresh, or like Parleview hasn't stopped once at all. So there's nothing that I've done on my end to change anything. That's just Parliament's obviously fixed its tech issues. So that's half the reason why I haven't got some clips out and of important stuff on the channel from our committees and stuff, is because it's been a pain in the ass with some of the tech issues. But it seems to be all fixed now, which is good. So, like I said, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate everybody watching. Shout out to some of the members here that we got. We got Jennifer in to the Axe Attacks. Appreciate you joining the club. Savage has been a member for 2 months. Really appreciate you, Savage, as always. And that little super chat you did there, always appreciate you. So I will see you guys in an hour. Thanks for watching, guys.